Brooke Jensen was the empath, Tyler Mendez the thinker, Riley Stevens the spark, and Hannah Clarke the heart. But in one horrifying night, all four vibrant lives were stolen without a sound, leaving behind a silent house, a shattered town, and a mystery that would grip the nation. Moscow, Idaho was the kind of place people moved to when they wanted to escape noise and chaos. Surrounded by rolling hills and pine trees, it was a small college town where students biked to class and neighbors knew each other's dogs by name. Crime was rare and usually involved something petty, like a bike being stolen or someone breaking a window at a bar on a Friday night. For most of the residents, life felt peaceful, ordinary, and safe. At the center of that normal life was the University of Idaho, a campus filled with energy and youth, where students balanced lectures, part-time jobs, and weekend parties. In the fall of 2022, 4 students shared a rental home just off campus on Willow Lane. The house, with its worn red shutters and string lights draped across the porch, was a popular hangout spot for their small circle of friends. Inside lived Brooke Jensen, a soft-spoken psychology major from Boise, Tyler Mendez, originally from Spokane, who studied mechanical engineering and had a habit of pulling all-nighters with textbooks and energy drinks, Riley Stevens, the bold and creative art major whose paintings filled the living room walls, and Hannah Clarke, a focused and empathetic nursing student who often volunteered at the local clinic. Though each of them had different majors and personalities, they'd become like family, drawn together by shared routines and the comfort of having each other around. The house had its quirks. The plumbing groaned, the front door stuck in the winter, and the basement always felt a little too cold, but it had character. Most nights ended the same, music playing from someone's speaker, the smell of popcorn from the microwave, and the occasional late-night conversation about life, exams, or dreams for the future. Neighbors often saw the 4 laughing on the porch, wrapped in hoodies against the cold, sipping coffee or hot chocolate, planning their weekends, or arguing playfully about whose turn it was to do dishes. There was no warning that anything would go wrong, no sign that someone was watching, no reason to believe that this normal house on a quiet street would become the center of one of the most unsettling crimes in Idaho's history. To everyone who knew them, Brooke, Tyler, Riley, and Hannah were just college students living their lives, studying, socializing, and figuring things out like everyone else. They were making memories, unaware that they were being watched by someone who did not belong in their world. The house, once filled with laughter and light, would soon become the setting of a tragedy no one could have imagined. In a town where nothing ever happened, something was about to shatter the silence. 4 lives, full of potential, were days away from being stolen, and the quiet town of Moscow would never be the same. The night of November 12th began like any other weekend for the 4 friends living on Willow Lane. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and the streets of Moscow hummed with the usual rhythm of a college town. Students drifted between downtown bars, late-night eateries, and house parties. Brooke had attended a small get-together with classmates. Tyler was seen studying at the campus library earlier that evening. Riley had been out with friends, showing off one of her new art projects, and Hannah had just come off a long shift at the student health center. One by one, they all returned home between 10:45 p.m. and 1:00 a.m., unaware that someone was watching from the shadows. No one in the neighborhood noticed anything unusual that night. The house looked as it always did, lights on in the living room, faint music echoing through the walls, and the faint outline of movement behind the curtains. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed Brooke and Riley stopping briefly to pick up snacks before heading home. A time-stamped video from a street camera recorded Tyler walking alone, his phone lighting up his face. Everything appeared normal, at least on the surface. By sunrise, the house was still. There were no signs of life. A roommate who had spent the night elsewhere returned around 11:30 a.m. She noticed the front door was ajar, which struck her as odd, but not alarming. Inside, the house was silent. No footsteps, no voices. The atmosphere felt heavy, like something wasn't quite right. As she moved through the living room, she noticed one of the cell phones vibrating repeatedly on the couch. She called out for the others. No response. What she found upstairs would haunt the town forever. All four housemates were dead. Each victim had been attacked in their sleep. There were no broken windows or forced locks, no shattered glass or overturned furniture. The only trace of violence was behind closed doors, as if the intruder had slipped in and out with surgical precision. Nothing had been stolen. Wallets, laptops, and phones were untouched. Even their pet cat had been left unharmed. The 911 call came in just before noon. Emergency responders arrived within minutes and quickly secured the scene. Officers cordoned off the block, yellow tape fluttering in the wind as neighbors watched in disbelief. News spread rapidly. By the afternoon, local stations were reporting a quadruple homicide. Within hours, state and federal agents were brought in to assist, but there were no suspects, no clear motive, and no witnesses. The lack of noise during the attack baffled investigators. Forensics teams combed the house inch by inch, collecting fibers, fingerprints, and DNA samples. Meanwhile, police began reviewing security footage from all over town, trying to track any unusual activity near the house. But the question remained: how had someone entered, committed such a brutal crime, and vanished without a trace? The community's sense of security was gone. Fear settled over Moscow like a fog, and the once quiet streets now held a sinister undertone. As investigators sifted through the evidence, the mystery only deepened. The crime scene offered little clarity. No murder weapon was found. The wounds suggested a sharp, fixed blade weapon, but nothing matching that description was located inside or near the house. The killer had left behind minimal traces. No obvious footprints, no clear fingerprints, and no signs of DNA that could be easily matched in national databases. The case seemed meticulously executed, almost too clean for an unplanned act. That detail led detectives to believe that the killer had studied the victims, possibly for weeks, maybe longer. Attention turned to digital clues. The victims' phones were analyzed for messages, call logs, and any signs of threats. That's when investigators discovered something chilling. Each of the four students had received anonymous text messages in the weeks leading up to their deaths. The messages were vague but unsettling. Phrases like, "I see everything," "soon," and "you've been chosen." None of them had taken the text seriously. They were chalked up to spam or prank messages, not uncommon among college students. But now, those cryptic texts seemed far more sinister. Detectives managed to trace the messages to a prepaid phone purchased in a different state, nearly 300 miles away. The buyer had used cash and wore a mask and hat, avoiding the security camera's direct view at the checkout counter. There was no name, no address, no paper trail. The burner phone had only been active for 2 weeks before the murders, and had never made a single call. It was used strictly to send texts. Once the murders occurred, the phone was shut off permanently and never reactivated. The revelation changed the scope of the investigation. This was no random act of violence. It wasn't the result of a drunken dispute or a personal grudge that spiraled out of control. This was planned, deliberate, and executed by someone who had taken extraordinary steps to remain invisible. Further interviews with friends and classmates revealed a strange incident that had occurred just 2 weeks before the killings. Tyler had reported a break-in at the house. Nothing was stolen, but he had found a window slightly open in the basement and muddy footprints on the laundry floor. The police took a report, but without anything stolen or damaged. It was labeled a non-priority case. That oversight would now be seen in a much darker light. The neighbors were re-interviewed, and several recalled seeing a dark figure loitering in the alleyway behind the house during the past month. One described a man in a hoodie who stood motionless for over an hour before walking away. Another reported seeing a car idling on the street late at night with its headlights off. These clues, once ignored, were now pieces of a larger puzzle pointing to someone who had stalked the victims and studied their routines. The investigation was no longer about what had happened that night. It was about what had been building for weeks in the shadows, just beyond the reach of notice. The killer hadn't appeared suddenly. He had been there all along, watching, waiting, preparing. Weeks passed with no arrest, and frustration began to spread. The town of Moscow, once known for its calm charm, had become a place of suspicion and whispers. Parents called their children daily, some students dropped classes, and many residents added security cameras to their homes. Investigators remained tight-lipped, but behind the scenes, they were chasing a new lead that would shift the direction of the case entirely. A student from a nearby dorm came forward after seeing the police sketches released in the media. He reported an encounter with a man who had approached him several times on campus, claiming to be a graduate assistant working on a psychology research project. The man asked unusual questions, often personal, and took notes in a weathered notebook. When the student became uncomfortable and tried to avoid him, the man disappeared. He was never seen in class or around the department. When shown a blurred still image from the street camera taken the night of the murders, the student froze. He was sure it was the same man. Investigators traced the description to a name that didn't exist in university records: Caleb Rowan. There was no student file, no enrollment history, and no ID issued. The university confirmed that no one by that name had ever been employed or registered. The name was fake. But surveillance footage began to confirm something else: this man had been on campus frequently, walking through hallways, sitting in study lounges, even eating at the cafeteria. He had successfully blended into student life without anyone questioning him. Police released the image to the public, and more tips poured in. A former landlord in Washington recognized him, but knew him by a different name. Caleb had rented a room in a shared house under another alias and vanished after 2 months, leaving behind only a few personal items and a locked box he never reclaimed. Investigators obtained a warrant and recovered the box, which contained a trove of disturbing material: maps of Moscow, photos of the victims taken from a distance, and handwritten pages filled with ramblings about purity, cleansing, and being chosen to correct the noise of the world. Records from mental health facilities showed that Caleb had been institutionalized as a teenager for stalking and threatening classmates. Over time, he had fallen through the cracks, never fully treated and never properly monitored. His aliases allowed him to move undetected, drifting between towns and universities, often claiming to be someone he was not. In Moscow, he had been watching the Willow Lane house for weeks. His notes revealed details only someone observing closely could know: who usually arrived last at night, when the lights went off, and what rooms each person slept in. With a full name and a photo, the manhunt began. Authorities now knew who they were looking for, but Caleb had vanished. He left no digital footprint, no bank accounts, no social media. He had erased himself from the system. Now, the search for him would stretch beyond Moscow and into the deep wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, where it was said he once lived off the grid. The chase was on, and time was running out. The search for Caleb Rowan intensified as law enforcement expanded their efforts across Idaho and into neighboring states. Tips came in from hikers, gas station attendants, and travelers claiming to have seen someone matching his description. Helicopters swept over dense forests, and roadblocks were set up along remote highways. Despite the attention, Caleb managed to stay one step ahead. Investigators believed he was hiding in the wilderness, possibly using old trails and camping spots from his past. They focused their efforts on the northern region of Idaho, known for its remote terrain and scattered cabins. It was there, deep in Clearwater National Forest, that authorities finally found something. A local hunter reported smoke rising from a hidden ridge. When a search team arrived, they discovered a rundown cabin surrounded by thick brush. It had no electricity, no running water, and was nearly invisible from above. Inside, they found evidence of recent occupation: empty food cans, firewood, and a wall covered in torn notebook pages. Among the pages were drawings of the Willow Lane house, sketches of the victims' faces, and strange symbols scrawled repeatedly in red ink. One phrase was repeated dozens of times: "I watched, therefore I own." A short distance from the cabin, Caleb was found sitting near a creek, covered in dirt and wearing the same dark clothing seen in surveillance footage weeks earlier. He didn't run, he didn't resist. He simply raised his hands and waited, When taken into custody, he spoke very little, but investigators found everything they needed inside the cabin. Along with the journals and drawings were a hunting knife wrapped in cloth and a hard drive containing photos and videos he had secretly recorded of the victims over several weeks. During interrogation, Caleb offered a confession that was both cold and detached. He said he had chosen the victims because they were too loud, too bright, and that he felt called to silence them. He believed he had been overlooked his entire life, and saw their happiness as something he could never reach. By taking their lives, he claimed, he had balanced the world. There was no sign of remorse, only a chilling sense of satisfaction. The trial was swift and highly publicized. Caleb was declared mentally competent, though deeply disturbed. He was convicted on 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Families of the victims filled the courtroom during the sentencing, many wearing pins with the faces of Brooke, Tyler, Riley, and Hannah. The judge, unable to mask his own emotion, said it was one of the most senseless acts of cruelty the state had ever seen. The house on Willow Lane was eventually torn down. In its place, a small memorial garden was built with a bench and 4 plaques, one for each life taken too soon. Every year, on the anniversary of the tragedy, students and residents gather to remember them. The town still bears the scars, but it also carries their memory. The story of the Idaho Four serves as a grim reminder that evil can hide in silence. And sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones who are watching, waiting, and saying nothing at all.